racing with him in the same team was fantastic.
He was loved by everybody. His looks, his eyes, he could have been a film star.
He had all the makings of a world champion, really.
One day I realized that could happen to me.
It was one of those accidents that, you know, you should never see. I had read about Francois and I had seen him while I was driving both Formula 2 and Formula 1 cars. So it wasn't somebody that I didn't know. In addition to which, Jacqueline, his sister, was one of the prettiest girls in the paddock. And she was to go on and marry Jean-Pierre Beltoise. So he was kind of courting her, and Jim Clark was absolutely besotted by Jacqueline. So we had seen him around, but he won a race in Reims that I should have won, but he out-fumbled me. And then Ken Tyrrell asked me to go to Crystal Palace to see him racing, to see what I thought, because he was thinking of putting him in the Formula 1 team. And that, in fact, he did. So we went to Crystal Palace. I wasn't racing, so Ken and I went and had a look at a few corners. And he was a good racing driver. There was no doubt that he was going to become a big racing driver, so Ken did the right thing. And he was French, and we had Elf, and we were with Matra. So it was extra bonuses.
He was into F2 and had only just started that effectively when he was thrust into Formula 1. So he was arriving in Formula 1 with really essentially just 2 seasons of experience of any car racing at all, which when you compare him to the other rookies of that year, people like Fittipaldi and Peterson, they'd been racing karts and bikes for over a decade, and so it wasn't really a fair comparison, which is why his initial performances were a little bit underwhelming.
To begin with, Francois was some way back. We're driving a March, for example, which was a difficult car to drive, and he would be well off the pace. So Ken Tyrrell would say, you know, Jackie, we'll go out with Francois right behind you. Don't go too quick. Build him up to a speed that you think is right. So he would follow me, and therefore by so doing, he's going to brake at the same time as me, he's going to accelerate at the same time as me, he was learning how to turn in at the same time as me. And therefore the progression worked over a period of, it really took, nearly 3 years. But then again, it had taken us all longer than that to get to where we were as drivers. And I studied Jim Clark, for example. We had an apartment together, so we spent a lot of time together. And I learned from him. Francois was learning from me, but he was taking it in all the time. He was really absorbing it.
Jackie did all my education, Jackie Stewart. When I arrived in the team, I was a mad driver. I was driving like hell. I was not thinking enough to what I was doing. And Jackie stopped all that and teach me how you must analyze a car, how you must think when you are driving, what kind of vision you must have. He did all my education.
Francois was learning from him, and he was very happy to be second to Jackie until Jackie decided to stop. He was loved by everybody. I mean, his looks, his eyes, his everything. He was the epitome of the racing driver. Although he could have been a film star, he had looks enough to be. But you know, everybody liked him, and he was such an open character. There was no hidden things on Francois.
To begin with, he was unhappy with himself that he wasn't able to keep the same pace as I was, for example. But you know, here was I, had already won the World Championship once and, you know, had won a lot of races. But he grew up to be the man he was and the driver that he was. By the time, unfortunately, he died, he was certainly ready to be the #1 driver, and that was the whole plan.
On the Friday, in the practice, I spin the car at 200 miles an hour. And I laugh about it. I tell all my friends, I spun the car at 200 miles an hour, fantastic, very funny and so on. And next day, 200 yards ahead of me, Joren Rindt get killed. And I couldn't sleep the night before the race.
He was very focused and he had particular beliefs. For example, he wouldn't go to a funeral. Francois didn't like funerals. None of us like funerals, but we go. But he said no, he wasn't going to a funeral, which is, I've never had that before. So we had many talks about that.
He had that reputation. He was very good, but a little bit wild. And I think that probably made him come to the realization that actually this was a more serious discipline than that. And that's where Jackie's tutelage really became very effective. Tyrrell and Stewart were like a family business, and they could see the potential of Francois, and then they kept the faith. And gradually, through 71, the peaks became higher, and there were flashes of real promise. And at Watkins Glen, it was the first time he really put it all together. And Jackie had a tyre problem in the race, and that helped him. But then he had to fend off a very, very stern and sustained challenge from the Ferrari of Jackie Ickx, who was an absolute top liner at the time in a top car. And he withstood the pressure, and he drove a brilliant race, and that was his first and what turned out to be his only Grand Prix victory.
He enjoyed life all the way through. I mean, he used to arrive with Brigitte Bardot at the Paris Motor Show, for example. He was an extremely glamorous young man, great looks. He had a great physique because he was really strong, and most racing drivers are, but Francois was particularly quite keen at showing it all off. So he had a lot of girlfriends that came around. He was also a beautiful and talented pianist, classical music and everything else. He just was very talented. So the girls didn't object at all to his attentions, that's for sure. But he loved skiing, for example. And I said, you can't ski if you're going to motor race. Sure enough, he falls off his skis and breaks a collarbone, you know, before the season starts one year. So I wasn't approving of that. But he was a first-class sportsman. He was well coordinated and everything like that. So, and he did Can-Am, where I was doing Can-Am. So we traveled an awful lot together. And he had his own plane. He was very proud of his aircraft. And I flew with him a couple of times. He enjoyed his life. I think the Nürburgring was by far the most difficult racetrack in the world in Formula One in those days, because it was the big Nürburgring, which was 14.7 miles or 23 kilometers long. And I won there several times, but in my last year there, Francois followed me the whole way around from the first lap. And, you know, there'll be questions asked forever, could he have passed me? I really don't know. I mean, we were way ahead. We had a fairly big margin, so we weren't, you know, right up to the last minute or the last second or the last millisecond.
I remember an incident in the Dutch Grand Prix, where they were first and second all the race. And at one time, Jackie missed a gear going into Tarzan, and Francois lifted up and wait till Jackie gathered his wheel and whatever, and he didn't pass him. And then as they stopped, I came up to Francois to take his belts off, and Jackie got up first and got up quick and said, "You're an idiot, why didn't you pass me? It was your opportunity." Yes, but I could miss gears as well. I didn't want to pass you because you missed a gear or you made a mistake. I want to pass you when I'm better than you.
Racing with him in the same team was fantastic. He stayed at our house a lot. Helen and I knew him well, the children knew him well. And he was a first-class teammate. And at the end, he was going very well. There's no question I was going to retire at the end of the season, but Helen didn't know that. Francois didn't know it. Ken Tyrrell did know it. But I was absolutely sure he was going to be the #1 driver in the team. And Jody Scheckter would have been the #2 driver at that time. Because Francois was consistent and he was clean and he didn't overdrive. He had all the makings of a world champion, really.
He told his biographer that he asked the clairvoyant how he would do, and she said he would go on to great fame and fortune, but that he wouldn't live to be 30. And he'd sort of brushed it off to friends and to his girlfriend, saying, oh, it's no problem, I'll be world champion before I'm 30. He was very, very much aware of the risks of it, and he went into it with his eyes fully open. In Watkins Glen 1973, where of course he had his accident and died, that would have been his last Grand Prix before he turned 30, so that earlier prediction had a certain resonance.
We never discussed accidents or death. I mean, he was behind me when Roger Williamson died, for example, in Zandvoort, and we were first and second in that race. But Francois just never discussed that side of it with me. He had an accident the Grand Prix before in Canada where he came in collision, I think, with Jody Scheckter, and he hurt his ankle, was taken to hospital. But he had time to recover because it was 2 weeks before the American Grand Prix, so he came on holiday with Helen and I to recuperate. He wasn't intending to do that, but we went to Bermuda and we thought if he gets thermal treatment because of going to swim and all these things that you can do, which the doctors told him to do. So we spent a lot of time together then also. And then, of course, it was a question of whether I was going to retire or not, because it was already been speculated in the media. And of course, if I retired, he would be #1, he thought. But he was getting offers from other teams because he was obviously so good. So, and I couldn't tell him. But I told him to stay with Tyrrell because he's getting a strong car, reliable car, and he's, would do well.
He didn't know Jackie was going to retire, but he suspected he might be, I feel, because he'd been asking Jackie through the season whether he was going to continue next year, and he'd never got a clear answer. So in his mind, this was probably his last opportunity, if you like, if Jackie was going to retire. And Jackie had already won the title, so this was his last opportunity to go head-to-head with Jackie and beat him on equal terms. So he probably added an extra element of determination to his performances that weekend.
Ken Tyrrell, on the Friday before the Grand Prix, said to me, if you two are running, because 3 times we had been first and second that year, he said, if you two are running like that and there's enough space, you have to give a thought, why don't you let him past? And he could win the race. Oh, I said, Ken, that's a big ask. My 100th Grand Prix, my last Grand Prix. He says, yes, but you would look better for it. And I said, this was before practice started on Friday. I said, look, let's wait and see how we qualify, and then we can discuss it. And of course, that discussion never took place.
He did have a thing about numerology, and he told Joe Ramirez, I've got Cosworth engine number 6, I'm in Tyrrell 006, it's the 6th of October, and he felt this was a good omen. And he went out on that final run pretty confident he was going to get pole position. It was a notoriously tricky part of the circuit with no runoff, and it was a very short wheelbase car, which meant it responded very quickly. So if it got out of line, you didn't have much time to put it right. And essentially, it seems he'd gone into the first part of the corner. This was for what was going to be, he hoped, his pole position lap, and got just a little bit wide going in, which put him wide going out, so he hit the right-hand side of the track, the barrier on the right-hand side, which then rebounded him, put the car in the air and hit on the left-hand side of the track, upside down.
It was such a blow when Francois died. It was as if God had just slapped me across the wrist and said, you can't take things for granted. Because when Francois died, we were all out on the track, and therefore we all had to stop, and I was the last one there. So everybody else had been to the crash, been to Francois, and I went to him in the end, and it was just a shocking accident. It was one of those accidents that, you should never see. It was shock first, horrible shock. because the extent of the accident I won't get into, but it was a terrible, terrible shock. I've never seen the like. And I stayed with him as long as I thought I could. And it was such a terrible thing to see. And then walking away from it, I got so angry, the fact that this could happen and the sport could be so cruel and just so horrendous. I drove back to the pits and I got out, and I'll never forget, I threw my helmet into the cockpit. Something I'd never do. I mean, I'm very controlled in my emotions. And that, the shock, the anger turned to more grief, obviously. Helen was there, Edsel Ford was there, Bill Pollard, a good friend of mine, was there, and Ken was at his end, obviously. Nora was there, his wife. The mechanics were worried that it was a mechanical failure that caused it. And that's why I went out in the afternoon to drive my car again, just to prove to them that I didn't think it was their fault.
Pete Lyons was a very good journalist, still a very good journalist in the States, and he used to follow the Formula One in those days. And he came to us and said, look guys, I was there, I saw what happened, you have to worry, don't look at the car, it was just a driver error. Completely missed it, and when he hit the guardrail and then bounced to the other side, and that was it. And, well, I don't know, there is so many things going on the racing car that something could be fallen and maybe still look like a driver error. So
Francois was taken back to France, and we all, of course, went to the funeral, and then I retired. I think a week after that, I announced it in London.
I think the major reason is that I've retired for my family, for the children and for Helen, because I think that I've been a racing driver long enough. I've enjoyed it enormously, but I think it is my responsibility to retire for their sake, for their future, and for the happiness of the family. I desperately want to be happy in a family, and this, I think, is maybe the only way I could positively be sure of that.
Many of your colleagues have been killed in motor racing, particularly your very close colleague Francois Cevert. What part has that played in this decision?
In fact, the decision wasn't, I don't think, tempered by emotion in that direction, although it was very difficult to keep it out.
I think I'd like Francois to be remembered to be the glamorous character he was, the womanizer that he was, the racing driver that he was, the pianist that he was, the flavour of life that he enjoyed. He was an awful happy man all the way along. And he was a first-class friend. I couldn't have had a better friend than Francois. And I couldn't have had a better student than Francois. So we really cared a lot for each other, and so did Helen care for him, so did the boys care for him, and he was very good with all of them. He was just very close to us, and it was such a terrible end. I would love to have gone to all the races the following year and being with Ken Tyrrell in the pits and seeing Francois winning races. Nothing would have given me more pleasure than that.